Hello everyone, and thank you for watching our series on the 8 milestones of M&A. I'm your host Jacob, and in this video we'll be covering the purchase agreement. The purchase agreement is the final step in your M&A journey. But wait, don't start celebrating yet. There is still a lot of work to be done. We will work with you and your M&A attorney to make sure this document achieves your exit goals while also protecting you after the transaction is closed. Remember, this is a legally binding document, unlike the other documents you have encountered thus far. You need to be highly involved with this step of the process. Your purchase agreement will be a long and detailed document, and we'll cover these 6 sections. When we talk about definitions, we are only talking about words that are capitalized within the purchase agreement. All of these words will have clear and concise definitions spelled out, and they will be written in a way so that anyone can understand what is being conveyed. This is very important, as these definitions will create a common set of language for understanding specific calculations. Some examples include how net working capital will be determined, as well as the final adjusted EBITDA. This section will cover the following key terms: the final purchase price, payment mechanics for how the money will actually flow at closing, details on any earnouts, specifics regarding escrow accounts, and any purchase price adjustments. Ideally, most or all of these terms were already included in your LOI. As we move into the reps, warranties, and schedules included in your purchase agreement, it's good to understand why these are so important. Both buyers and sellers are expected to state that certain conditions and facts are true at the time of the sale. Your disclosures as the seller far exceed those of the buyer. With this being the case, it is in this section and the indemnification section you will rely heavily on us and your legal counsel to protect your interests. Remember, you could be held personally liable post-closing for items in this section. We will do our best to ensure you are protected, but you, again, need to be deeply involved with this section of the agreement. To support the reps and warranties, we will include schedules in the purchase agreement. Note, extensive work can and will go into each of these schedules. Hours can be spent researching and compiling materials, and these will be used during final due diligence. Let's start with the definition of indemnifications. These are actions caused by one party that can damage the other. Typically, these will be heavily weighted towards the buyer as they are taking on the most risk with the acquisition. Generally speaking, the buyer is trying to protect against future liabilities that result from the seller's actions or lack of actions during the pre-closing phase. This will require the seller to agree to compensate the buyer for damages. Some examples are listed here. Buyers and sellers may negotiate a discrete indemnification period and damages cap for each of the items identified. Lastly, indemnified items may be subject to a deductible and a materiality standard. If the claims never exceed a certain amount, the buyer pays the claims. This section is important as you will need to fully understand the timelines involved throughout the final closing process. Not everything happens all at once. The interim period is the time between the ending of negotiations and the closing of the transaction. During this time, the buyer wants to ensure that they are purchasing the company that they have agreed to purchase. Post-closing, the seller could also expect to see some conditions as part of the deal. These could include non-competes, transition services, and ongoing D&O insurance. Lastly, you can expect to see a final checklist of items that need to be completed by both parties prior to closing. It is possible for some items on this list to not be completed, but those exceptions will be agreed to prior to closing. Some examples of final checklist items include regulatory approvals for the transaction and landlord, customer, and vendor consents. At the end of this entire process, you will successfully complete your M&A journey. Thank you for watching our series on the 8 milestones of M&A. Be sure to check out the other videos included in our M&A Success Library.